Rescued from the Reich is the story of Rabbi Joseph Schneerson, head of the Hasidic Lubavitcher movement, who escaped to America in 1940. This talk is an hour and a half.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Strauss and Director Ryans, for having me again. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Now can everybody hear me? Okay. I'm going to wait. We are blessed to have C-SPAN here tonight. I'm just going to wait and hear if they are okay. Okay? Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I am honored to have in the audience my wonderful in-laws, Mary Dell and Dr. Paul Stelcher. And also we're honored in the audience to have Miss Neumark. She is the daughter of Samuel Kramer, and Debbie Neumark joins us here. And Samuel Kramer was very instrumental in organizing this rescue. Without this gentleman, the Rebbe Schneerson would not have gotten out of Europe during World War II. Now, before I begin, I'd like to give you a little background on my person. I was born in Texas in 1971, and I was raised in a very Protestant environment. I did not know about my own Jewish background until I was 21, when I went over to Germany and started researching my family's past, and I found all these Jews in the family tree. And I did not know what that meant at that time. I just had visions of an old white guy coming off a mountain with two rocks in his hands. I had no context from which to put that information into and understand about my Jewish background. And so when I came back to Yale University to begin my sophomore year in 1992, I began talking to a lot of my Jewish friends about what it meant to be Jewish and who is a Jew. And I was at the Hillel there. And during the course of this conversation, an Orthodox rabbi in the corner of the room overheard it, came over, and started mapping out my family's tree. And suddenly he got very excited, and he said, "Baruch Hashem, you're a Jew." And I asked him, "Well, what does that mean?" He says, "Well, according to halakha, Jewish law, you are a Jewish. Welcome to the tribe." And soon thereafter, I got a book by Donnan called To Be a Jew from him. And then about a year later, I got a scholarship from him to go to Or Sameach Yeshiva in Jerusalem and study with the yeshiva bochas there, the yeshiva boys. And so I've really embraced my Jewish background, and I'm proud of that legacy. When I was in the Marine Corps, actually, I was in a platoon that had a man by the name of Schweitzer, had another guy by the name of Lee. He was from the tribe of Levin. And then there was Rigg, me. And I was the only person that knew the Shema. And every night before we went to bed, we would line up, and in the Marine Corps, we'd always say, God, country, and corps, put our heads down, put our hands together, and there would be somebody that would lead us in a Protestant prayer and then a Catholic prayer. And I went up to the company commander and I said, "Hey, we got 3 people here in the platoon that are of Jewish descent. Do you mind if I do the Shema every night?" And he agreed to do so. So every night, I led the Shema for Schweitzer, Lee, and myself. I also got the other extreme of Jewish experience and did a little stint in the Israeli military in 1998. So I've embraced that. And the reason why I tell you about that is, had I not found out about my own Jewish background, I would not be standing before you talking to you about a book about Nazi Germany in the Third Reich. I also like to give you a little background on my educational history. I have the dubious honor of having failed first grade twice. I have what people today call ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Back when I was a kid, it was called HLD, Hyperkinesis Learning Disabled, or MBD, Minimal Brain Dysfunction. I also had a speech impediment when I was a kid. I got my T's and F's mixed up all the time, so when I played with my trucks around my family's friends, it was quite an interesting conversation. Or when I asked the babysitter to tuck me into bed, my mom was beside herself with grief going, "Oh, vey, what am I going to do with this kid?" So after I failed first grade twice and started having these creative language skills, my mom realized she had to do something very quickly. She had this nightmare that her 20-year-old son would be able to eventually drive himself to his own 6th grade graduation if she didn't do something. So she started looking around the area in Dallas-Fort Worth, where we lived, to find a special school for me. And she found one at Texas Christian University called Star Point. And it was a lab school that focused on severely learning disabled children. I met all the requirements, was accepted, and when I went there, I was very demoralized. Since the school that I had gone to where I had failed first grade at twice was also the church that my family went to, every Wednesday night, every Sunday morning, and every Sunday night, I was continually reminded of my failures. So when I went to this school, I was very down on my luck. And I told Mary Stewart, my teacher, about this. And after she heard about my experiences, she said, "Brian, you're not a freak, you're not abnormal, you're just different. You're not learning disabled, you're learning different. And I'm here to help you find your strengths." And in 1 year, I went from not being able to pronounce individual words to reading books at the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade level and doing math at the junior high level. I also, thank God, figured out the difference between T's and F's. And she taught me through this experience. She said, "Look, Brian, you're a contrarian. All those kids were calling you stupid, that you couldn't read, and now you're reading at a higher level than they are." She also taught me through this experience that when people label criticism at you, they're telling you more about themselves than they are about who you really are. And that philosophy has really lived with me for the rest of my life. And when I graduated Yale University with honors in history, that teacher, Mary Stewart, was there. She's been a guiding light, an angel in my life. And I tell you that because without that experience, I would not be in front of you, today. Also, I had a wonderful mother and grandmother that helped me with my learning disabilities, and they got me on an all-natural diet, the Feingold diet, that really helped me. They took away artificial flavors and artificial colors, and that got me on track as well. And I'm still on this diet today. I watch what I eat. A lot of people don't realize that artificial flavors and artificial colors and preservatives, they're petroleum-based products. You're actually eating oil when you eat them. BHT, which is in a lot of cereal, that's actually formaldehyde. That's what they used to embalm bodies with. So when I would eat that with the sensitive system that I had, it would make me go haywire. So I tell you this information again to give you a little background on my person, and also to let you understand that when I started researching about a Nazi soldier rescuing the head of Lubavitcher, the most Orthodox rabbi in 1939 out of Europe, and most of my professors told me, "Hey, you're not going to find anything," that contrarian kicked in. I said, "Hey, I'll look into it and see what I find." So now to my research. In 1992, I began researching the phenomenon about Jews and men of Jewish descent who served in the German armed forces during World War II, the results of which were published in 2002 as Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. During the course of this research, I came across this story about our anti-Semitic, anti-refugee U.S. government working with the Nazi Secret Service to rescue a rabbi. And what makes the story even more incredible is that the person that the German Secret Service used to rescue the rabbi was a half-Jewish German major who had been Aryanized by Hitler. Now, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'll be using terms like half-Jew, quarter-Jew, Aryan. Please have these terms in quotation marks in your mind's eyes. They are Nazi terms, but they help us understand the history from back then. And when I first came across this story, as one can well imagine, I doubted the validity of it. But further research has proved the truth of it. And it has been a wild journey that has brought me in touch with some wonderful professors and historians of the Third Reich, like Jonathan Steinberg, Michael Barabbaum, David Kranzler, and Henry Feingold. It also has brought me in touch with several Wehrmacht veterans of Jewish descent. Wehrmacht is the German term for the armed forces of World War II. And has brought me in touch with numerous rabbis of one of the most ultra-Orthodox Jewish sects, the Lubavitchers. Now, some of you might be asking, if this story is so incredible, why hasn't it been documented until now? Well, the Lubavitchers are a very ahistorical group. They look at this in a very spiritual way. And many of them have not looked into it in depth. Also, the documents are spread out all over the world, and so many of them have just, carried on the oral tradition that God saved the Rebbe, and that's basically the explanation that was good enough for them. Also, some historians and journalists have touched upon this rescue, but usually only in a few pages or a few paragraphs. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first historical account to synthesize sources from the Lubavitchers, documents from the archives, National Archives in America, as well as Germany, and written in oral testimonies into a single book. Much of what I'm about to tell you has never been told before. And in order to write this book, I had to go over 10,000 pages of documents, read over 60 books of the secondary literature, interview over 60 individuals, and collect hundreds of photographs. Now, in order for you to understand this rescue, you must have a fundamental understanding of the Lubavitchers and their arch leader, the Rebbe. The ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect, known as the Lubavitchers, had its origins in the Hasidic movement, which began around 1730 under the charismatic leadership of the Baal Shem Tov. Hasidic is the Hebrew word for pious. Now, the Baal Shem Tov came on the scene when when Eastern European Jewry was suffering a lot of hardships. They had undergone the trauma of the false crusade of Sabbatai Tzvi, the false Messiah crusade of Sabbatai Tzvi in 1666, and they had been devastated by pogroms in Poland and Russia. So they were hungering for a better future and for a better way to connect with God. And the Baal Shem Tov tapped into their desires with amazing power, and by the end of his life in 1760, the Hasidic movement numbered into the hundreds of thousands. This Hasidic movement is somewhat akin to what happened here in America with the Great Awakening, what the Baal Shem Tov was able to do for Eastern European Jewry. Now, soon after his death, several of his closest disciples spread out through Eastern Europe, and they set up their own schools of theology and their own Hasidic sects. One of them was Rebbe Shneur Zalman of Lydia, who set up his headquarters in Lubavitch, Russia, hence the term the Lubavitchers. Now, the Lubavitchers believe that, like other Hasidic sects, that their Rebbe and their philosophy, their Chabad philosophy, were incomparable. Chabad is an acronym for the Hebrew words Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat, meaning wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And these are Kabbalistic terms, or Jewish mystical terms. And the Lubavitchers believe that every Jew should have a deep and mystical connection with God and have a thorough understanding of the 613 commandments that God has given every Jew to fulfill in his or her life. And although Messianism has been a constant theme of Judaism the last 2,000 years, the Lubavitchers focus much more on the Messiah and what each Jew must do to hasten his arrival than other Hasidic sects. And this has caused some controversy recently when Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, passed away with no heir apparent, and many in the community declared that he was indeed the Mashiach, or the Messiah. Also, since the beginning of this group, each Rebbe has focused heavily on outreach programs, building up Chabad houses all over the world, as they call them. As many of you know who have had contact with Lubavitch, there's not a corner on this world without a Lubavitcher Chabad house. I saw a cartoon recently that illustrates that point dramatically. It shows a picture of Mars, and as you look at this cartoon, it says underneath, "Intelligent life has been found on the red planet." And as you look over the horizon, you see the golden rings of McDonald's, and then next to it you see a Chabad house. So they have really been amazing with their outreach program. Now, I've used the term Rebbe several times, and many people have asked me about this word. The term Rebbe is a variation of the word rabbi, which means my teacher or my leader, and is the title given to heads of Hasidic courts. While there can be many rabbis in one Hasidic community, there usually can be only one Rebbe, somewhat akin to the Catholic community where you can have one pope but many priests. And in the Hasidic community, the leadership of a Rebbe is usually dynastic. Now, the Lubavitchers believe that their Rebbes are endowed with mystical powers and are the potential messiahs of their generations. Now, for most observant Jews, every generation has a potential messiah. The Lubavitchers just believe that if the messiah is going to come, it's going to indeed be their Rebbe. They also believe that their Rebbe is endowed with the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, and is without sin. Elie Wiesel, a noted Holocaust writer and survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner, eloquently describes what these Rebbes are. He says, "He is what can be, what man wants to be. He is the chosen one who is denied nothing in heaven or on earth. God is angry. He can make him smile. God is severe. He can induce him to leniency." The Lubavitchers also believe that their Rebbes intellectually know and emotionally feel the spiritual and physical needs of every Jew everywhere and know how to connect him or her to God and reveal his or her role in the divine blueprint of humanity. So for members of Chabad, they believe that their Rebbes are not only perfect human beings, but prophetic figures worthy of total submission. Elie Wiesel goes on to explain that in Hasidim, the Rebbe, by the virtue of the strength he incarnates and the majesty he invokes, is the father figure par excellence. Someone good yet strict, someone charitable yet severe, tolerant with others, but inflexible with himself. In other words, a singular human being in whom all attributes converge and in whom all contradictions are resolved. The Lubavitchers also believe that their Rebbes, once dead, unlike other Jews who have died, are closer to heaven, to God, and are still able to hear the requests of people down here on earth. And as a result, many Lubavitchers go to the grave sites of their Rebbes and leave prayer requests there so that they may be heard more quickly. When our story starts to unfold in the 1930s, 6th generation of Schneerson family members had led the movement of Lubavitch as Rebbes. And the current leader was the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Joseph Isaac Schneerson, who was born in 1880 in Lubavitch, Russia, and assumed command of the leadership in 1920 on the death of his father. He came on the scene as leader of Lubavitch when Russian Jewry was having a lot of difficulties. Most Lubavitchers at this time were living in Russia. And since the Soviet Union had taken over power, they had outlawed a lot of religious organizations and religious education. And this was one of the core tenets of Lubavitch. In Lubavitch, most Lubavitchers are very stubborn, and they refused to obey these decrees, and as a result, many of them were arrested and sent off to gulags in Siberia and killed. The Rebbe himself was arrested several times, beaten up horribly in jail, and in 1927, he was condemned to death. But before the death sentence was carried out, several prominent individuals throughout the world, one of them being Leo Baeck, famous Reform rabbi in Germany, Leo Baeck, and even our president in the United States, President Coolidge, wrote on his behalf. Under this pressure, the Rebbe was released. But the Soviet Union was tired of the Rebbe's shenanigans, and they kicked him out of the country. And he went to Riga, Latvia, where he became a Latvian citizen, but then soon thereafter he moved down to Warsaw, Poland, where he set up his headquarters outside of the capital in a town called Otwock. Now, by 1939, his new headquarters there had spread out its tentacles all throughout the world. In America at this time, according to Lubavitch sources, there was around 150,000 Lubavitchers here. And also this headquarters was doing a lot of work clandestinely, of course, to support communities in Russia. In 1939, the Rebbe was 59 years old, and he was not in very good health, probably due to all the persecution he had suffered under the Soviets. He had suffered a heart attack and a stroke, and he was sick with multiple sclerosis, a degenerative disease of the central nervous system, symptoms of which range from paralysis, numbness, to incontinence, all of which the Rebbe seemed to suffer from. He also had difficulty moving around. He had to be put in a wheelchair to go from one point to another, and he also had to be helped up from chairs and out from cars. He also had difficulty speaking. When he did speak, it sounded like he was mumbling, and his volume was not very high. Also adding to his ill health was the fact that he was overweight, and he smoked over a pack of cigarettes a day. There wasn't a lot of knowledge back then about the dangers of smoking. Standing at 5'8" and weighing over 200 pounds, he didn't strike a very impressive figure physically. Yet his followers thought of him as an incredible spiritual giant. Our story begins on the 1st of September, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. And as 1.5 million German troops crossed over the border into Poland, 3.3 million Jews lived in that nation. By 1945, only a few 100,000 of those Jews had survived the Shoah, had survived the Holocaust. With this in mind, one sees that half of the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust were Polish Jews. Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics quickly overwhelmed the Polish nation, preventing most Jews from escaping. Behind his military legions came his killing squads that quickly implemented his worldview of doing away with undesirables, like socialists, priests, members of the intelligentsia, and Jews. Many of these barbaric acts were done in front of Wehrmacht commanders who surprisingly decided to protest these acts. One of them was the head of the German Secret Service, the Abwehr, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris. And he believed that these atrocities defamed the German nation and that these units should be removed from Poland at once. Now, when these protests reached Hitler, Hitler declared that our struggle must not be measured by terms of legality or illegality. Our methods must conform to our principles. We must prevent a new Polish intelligentsia from seizing power and rid the greater German Reich of Polish and Jewish riffraff. With such a policy in place, the Jews of Poland quickly fell into the abyss of the Holocaust. Jews who would survive in Poland during World War II did so by passing themselves off as Aryans, as the Nazis would call them, serving with the partisans, or surviving the ghettos and death camps. And one of the most remarkable rescues, or escapes, if you will, from Nazi Germany and Nazi-occupied Europe in World War II was the escape of Joseph Isaac Schneerson, head of Lubavitcher, and he did so with the help of Abwehr agents, with the help of German Secret Service agents. Now, as I studied this story, the more I came to really believe that truth is indeed stranger than fiction. And to set that tone, I'd like to tell you the following story. A little boy comes home from Hebrew school, and his mother asks him, "Hey, Johnny, what did you learn today?" And Johnny says, "You know, Mom, I really don't want to talk about it." And she's like, "No, Johnny, I'd be interested. Come on, tell me, hon, what did you learn?" He's like, "Well, Mom, we learned about this guy by the name of Moses. And he was in Egypt at the time, and he was tired of the way the Egyptians were treating the Jews, so he gathered all the Jews together. There was a few million of them, Mom, and he escaped from Egypt. And then they came up to the Red Sea, and suddenly they heard that the Egyptian army was coming after them, Mom, and going to kill them. So Moses, he got on his walkie-talkie, and he called in the Israeli Air Force to bomb and strafe the Egyptians. And while the Air Force, Mom, was bombing and strafing the Egyptians, he had his pioneers build this huge pontoon bridge across the Red Sea. And then he got the millions and millions of Israelites across that pontoon bridge, across the Red Sea on the other side. And then, Mom, he put satchel charges all along that bridge. And then when the Egyptians came on that bridge, he had those satchel charges blown up. The Egyptians, Mom, they can't swim. So when they fell in the water, they all drowned. And that's why we have the state of Israel today. The mom looks down at Johnny, says, "Johnny, is that what you really learned in Hebrew school today?" Johnny looked down at the ground, kind of shuffled his feet, and he says, "No, Mom, but if I told you the truth, you wouldn't believe it." Now, when the Germans invaded Poland, many of the Lubavitchers there went up to the Rebbe, and they said, "Rebbe, you got to get out of here. It's dangerous to stay. The Germans are going to come here." But the Rebbe did not agree with the timing or methods. He said that the Lord Almighty would take care of his children in times of danger, and that he, as a shepherd of his flock, should not leave them in times of misfortune. He also said, slamming his cane down on the ground, that he would not have to get out of Poland, but Hitler would have to leave. Yet, for all of his bravado, he soon saw the writing on the wall, and he realized that he indeed needed to get out of Poland. And the plan was to take a car from Otwock to Warsaw, and then once in Warsaw, to get on a train there and get to Riga, Latvia, to freedom. And before he left all his followers who had to remain behind, he told them, "Be well and accept the yoke of heaven upon yourselves. Remember that the King takes care of those who serve him. Remember also that you are children of God, and may he protect you and keep you alive. May he watch over all of us and let us survive." And with that, he got into the car and started on his way to Warsaw. Now, the road leading to the capital was lined with the dead remains of horses, civilians, and Polish soldiers, all caught in the maelstrom of battle. All along the horizon, you saw the crumpled heaps of villages and buildings that had been hit by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and large black plumes of smoke rose up high into the air. The sky and the earth seemed to be welded together into the chaos of war. And as the Rebbe and many of his followers were driving through this horror, many of them became scared for their lives, and they started yelling out the Shema, the holy Jewish prayer. They thought that they were about to meet their Maker. But the Rebbe calmed them down, telling them that God was watching after them and that his father, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, was right then and there in heaven, interceding on their behalves with God. A journey that should have taken them only half an hour to an hour, took them several hours, but eventually they arrived in Warsaw. But the Rebbe wasn't able to escape. The main train station had been bombed down to the ground, and most of the train links leading down to the capital had been destroyed by the Luftwaffe. So the Rebbe was trapped. And here is a picture of Warsaw. In 1939, during the bombing campaign, 40% of the city would be bombed down to the ground, and over 40,000 civilians would lose their lives. So the Rebbe was in the middle of a war zone, but he seemed to be always followed by a divine cloud of protection. One time, he left a building, and a minute later, it was hit by bombs from the Luftwaffe. The whole structure came crumbling down. Everybody died. Another time, he was in a courtyard during a bombing attack. Everybody outside that courtyard was hit and killed. The Rebbe was thrown by the concussion from one side to the other side, yet he was untouched. Another time, the Rebbe was studying his Torah at a desk in somebody's home during a bombing attack, and the whole place was sprayed with shrapnel. Yet the Rebbe and his Torah were untouched. Many people at this time felt that if they wanted to survive the Nazi bombardment of Warsaw, they just had to stay close to the Rebbe. Now, the Rebbe during this time, since he couldn't leave, he was trying to get a lot of his yeshiva students out on foot to neutral countries. He also was doing everything he could to save his library. He had a deep and mystical attachment to his 40,000 book library. On the 17th of September, and also I want to have this scene in your mind's eye. During bombing attacks, the Rebbe was in a wheelchair. So during a bombing attack, his yeshiva students had to run up to his room, pick him up in the wheelchair, carry him downstairs and into a bunker. If the building got destroyed, they had to put him on a stretcher or put him in the wheelchair and carry him through the burning streets of Warsaw. So this is what's going on all during this time. 17th of September, the Lubavitchers got a lot of bad news. The Soviet Union had invaded Poland from the east and were moving quickly on to the capital. And the Lubavitchers felt that if the Rebbe fell into the hands of the Soviets, no amount of international pressure would help save him this time. Yet they also felt the coils of the Nazi regime tightening around the capital, and they knew that if the Nazis got their hands on the Rebbe, he would also be murdered. On the 25th of September, Hitler decided to raze the whole capital to the ground. He was tired of the intransigence of the Polish High Command's unwillingness to surrender, and so he had all his forces focused on the capital. 500 tons of explosives and 72 tons of incendiaries were dropped on the city by the Luftwaffe, accompanied by hundreds of tons of artillery shells. The whole place erupted into an inferno. Yet once again, the Rebbe survived. And on the 27th of September, the Polish High Command finally surrendered. Now the Rebbe was under control of the Nazis. And many at this time felt that he would soon be killed, and they were struck with grief. They felt that the greatest Jewish sage and even the potential Messiah of their generation was going to be taken from them. During this time, many Lubavitchers in America were doing everything they could to get a rescue plan organized. And the Rebbe had the good fortune in 1930 to have met President Hubert Hoover, Justice Louis Brandeis, and Senator Robert Wagner during a goodwill tour here in the United States. So the Lubavitchers in America at this time naturally contacted these men to try to get a rescue plan organized. And to their great luck and to their great surprise, these men decided to act on it. And they sent the request up the chain of command. And this eventually arrived at the desk of Secretary of State Cordell Hull and Assistant Attorney General Benjamin Cohen, the architect of the New Deal. And these men must have got the approval from Roosevelt, because a few days later, the State Department, as you see with this telegram here up on the PowerPoint screen, the State Department sent a telegram to the American Embassy in Berlin for them to find the Rebbe and rescue him. As you see in the right-hand corner, you'll see the signature of Hull. He sanctioned this document. Soon thereafter, the State Department was able to establish contact with the head of the German Secret Service, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who decided to actually help us. Canaris is a strange bird. On one side, he gave the Wehrmacht invaluable military intelligence to conduct its operations during the war. He agreed with doing away with communism, and he also wanted to get back a lot of the lands that were taken from Germany with the Versailles Treaty. Yet, on the other side, he did not agree with a lot of the Nazi government's policies against racial inferiors, as they were described. And he had proved this by helping several Jews escape Germany throughout the 1930s and also hiring several people of Jewish descent in his own organization. So from an ideological point of view, Canaris was a good ally to have. Also remember, ladies and gentlemen, in 1939, Germany was not at war with America, and Canaris wanted to keep it that way. So he wanted to keep a certain modicum of goodwill between the two nations, so he could not ignore a request from some of the highest levels of the U.S. government. So he decided to act on this. And Canaris ordered one of his most trusted officers, Major Ernst Bloch, to lead the mission on the ground. This gentleman had no relationship to the famous composer or philosopher Ernst Bloch. That is, that I know of. Ernst Bloch was a creature of war. In 1914, at the outbreak of World War I, he volunteered for military service at the age of 16. In 1915, during hand-to-hand combat, he suffered a horrible wound to his face, taking a bayonet up through his jaw, his mouth, and into his brain, dividing his face vertically. He was left for dead on the battlefield, and 3 days later, as they were bulldozing a whole bunch of dead bodies into a mass grave, one of them screamed out. It was Bloch. And after 20 surgeries to his face and about 4 months of convalescent leave, he returned to the murderous trenches of the Western Front and served 3 more years as an infantry officer, taking 8 more wounds, taking shrapnel to his head, his torso, his arms, and bullet wounds to one leg. He ended the war as a first lieutenant and decorated with the equivalent of 9 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and 2 Silver Stars. This guy was a true warrior, and he was also a true survivor. After World War I, he made the successful transition into the Reichswehr, the military under the Weimar Republic. In 1924, he got his doctorate in economics. In 1933, he made the successful transition into the army of the Third Reich. And in 1935, Canaris hired him to be head of the economic espionage division of the Abwehr. Yet there was one problem. Ernst Bloch was a half-Jew. So Canaris had to get an application together with Bloch and submit it to Hitler to get Bloch Aryanized. In Hitler's warped view of genetics, he really believed that if a half-Jew or a quarter Jew had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a good military track record, that he was being dominated by his Aryan blood. And as a result, Hitler reserved the right to give such people the kosher stamp of approval of Aryanhood, if you will. And Bloch received such an absurd award, but Bloch was not unique. Generals, admirals, U-boat captains, battleship captains, fighter aces, divisional commanders, and thousands of ordinary so-called Michelin soldiers, as the Nazis called them, half-Jewish and quarter-Jewish soldiers, all served because Hitler allowed them to, many of them with a personal exemption from him. And this is written up in detail in my first book, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. So Bloch was not unique having this exemption. He was also not unique being a half-Jew in the military. I conservatively estimate that 60,000 half-Jews and 90,000 quarter-Jews served in the German armed forces during World War II. And this is also written up in my first book. So Bloch is not unique being a half-Jew in the military and having an exemption from Hitler, but he was unique for this rescue mission. Canaris obviously picked Bloch because of Bloch's own Jewish background, but he also picked Bloch because Bloch was extremely intelligent, very professional, had a lot of international travel experience, and spoke 3 foreign languages. So Bloch was sent off to Warsaw and to rescue the Rebbe. Now imagine this scene, if you will. Canaris orders Bloch into his office. He sits him down and he says, "Bloch, I have an interesting operation for you. You're going to go up to Warsaw. You're going to find the most ultra-Orthodox rabbi in the world, and you're going to rescue him." You can't miss him. He looks just like Moses. And then he sends him off to Warsaw to do this. And Bloch is going around door to door and asking Orthodox Jews in Warsaw about the Rebbe. Now, it took a while for the information to get to the Lubavitchers that this guy was indeed there to help rescue him. As many of you will know with the Lubavitcher community, that if you tell one Lubavitcher rabbi something tonight, 10,000 of them will know it tomorrow. But in times of war, this took a while. What Canaris did is he sent information to Washington, D.C. About this operation. This information got into the hands of the lobbyist there and the linchpin, the person that was really key to this rescue, Samuel Kramer, which here again we're honored to have his daughter here, Debbie Neumark. And once he got this information, he sent that information on to the Lubavitchers in Brooklyn, New York. Then once in Brooklyn, New York, the Lubavitchers sent that information on to the Lubavitchers in Riga, Latvia. And then once that information was there, the Lubavitchers started sending runners down on the ground from Riga, Latvia to Warsaw to inform the Rebbe. But here again, this was time-consuming. And so Bloch is having a lot of problems as he's walking around Warsaw. And here again, have this in your mind's eye. He's ever bit the hardened veteran. His face is vertically divided by this horrible scar. He has swastikas all over his uniform, iron crosses. And he's going up to ultra-Hasidic Lubavitcher Jews with 3 or 4 other officers and soldiers in trail. And he's asking them, hey, where's the Rebbe? We want to rescue him. And the Lubavitchers are saying, yeah, sure you do. And we want to join the German army, you know. Where do we shave off our beards and throw away our yarmulkes? I mean, it was such an absurd situation, but eventually the Rebbe gets information that Bloch is indeed there to rescue him. And he hands himself over and 20 of his closest family members and disciples to Bloch's care. Now Bloch is faced with taking this group of ultra-Orthodox Jews through SS checkpoints. And many of these SS checkpoints were very problematic for Bloch, but one in particular is noteworthy. Bloch comes up and, to this checkpoint. An SS officer walks up to him. He's in his black uniform, SS runes, and he's very skeptical of this situation, of this picture. It's not the usual modus operandi of an Abwehr officer to conduct, a tour of Warsaw with 20 ultra-Orthodox Jews in trail. And after Bloch explains a little bit of what he's doing, the SS officer says, I've got no verification from Berlin. You have not been able to convince me of your mission. And we should be taking these Jews out and shooting them, not taking them around to trains and so on. Well, Bloch gets very angry. He starts dropping names. He starts, Canaris, head of the Abwehr, has sent me here. And then he starts naming other officers in the region who were in charge of regiments and divisions. Suddenly the SS officer gets a little nervous. And wanting to protect his backside, he opens up the barricade and lets Bloch through. Bloch gets back into the truck with the Rebbe. They drive on. And then Bloch looks over to the Rebbe and says, don't worry about it. I'm half Jewish. I'm here to help you. Meshuggah. In good Hebrew, crazy, but nonetheless true. And Bloch is successful in getting them through all these SS checkpoints to a train station outside of Warsaw that was still working. Now, it was understandable why the Lubavitchers were so skeptical of this man at first, because all during this time, Jews are being killed. And this picture unfortunately shows that. They're being taken out, made to dig their own graves, and then shot in the back of their heads. So this is the dramatic background that's going on at this time as Bloch is rescuing the Rebbe. Here's an oversight of the map of Europe. The yellow portion of the map is what went to Soviet Union after the conquest of Poland. And then the middle part, the grayish-purple part, is the section of Poland that went to Germany. And that's where everything that we're talking about today took place. Now here's the next stage of the comedy. Bloch gets them to the train station outside of Warsaw. Abwehr agents quite often only traveled in first-class cabins in Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, only field grade and general officers and high party officials traveled in first-class cabins. So Bloch enters this first-class cabin in this train with 20 ultra-Orthodox Jews with their kaftans, their fur hats, their yarmulkes, their tzitzits coming out of their suits. And the officers, admirals and generals there, are very confused by this. What are you doing? But Bloch once again uses his incredible acting skills, gets by these very difficult situations, and they get on the train. They take that train from outside of Warsaw to Berlin, And I think there's two reasons why they went all the way out of their way to Berlin instead of going directly to the Lithuanian border, which was the plan, in order to get Rebbe Schneerson to Riga, Latvia. The two reasons I think they did this was, the first one is to throw off the scent of the Gestapo. And the second reason was, remember, Rebbe Schneerson was still a Latvian citizen. So when Bloch got him to Berlin, he handed the Rebbe and many of his family members and disciples who were also Latvian citizens over to the Latvian diplomats to get their travel papers. Once he was able to complete this, they then, the next day, left from Berlin and they went to the border of Lithuania, and that's where Bloch bid the Rebbe farewell. And as the Rebbe crossed over the border into Lithuania, hundreds of Lubavitchers were there singing and dancing. Their leader had survived and had escaped. And then Rebbe Schneerson went on to Riga and waited for his visa from the United States. Also during this time, he was doing everything he could to rescue his library. He had a deep and mystical attachment to his books. One could even say he had an obsessive attachment to these books, and he did not want to depart with them. He also was having many people in the United States, many of his leaders, do everything they could to work with the government to get a lot of his personal effects out, his pots and pans and his jewelry and home goods. Now, it was very difficult to get a visa at this time. This is a sad chapter in the United States history. We prevented hundreds of thousands of people from coming to this nation because our State Department was motivated by anti-refugee and anti-Semitic sentiments. And the sad thing is, ladies and gentlemen, we actually had visas for these people. Just to give you a little indication about the spirit that people were dealing with in the State Department, the following story is quite telling. The person that was head of the immigration office was Breckinridge Long, and he was a horrible, horrible individual. And a person in his organization was approached to help rescue 20,000 beautiful, innocent Jewish children in Europe. And we had the ships. We were sending a lot of ships over to Europe at this time with supplies, and they were coming back empty. We could have put the kids on the ship. Well, this person in the Breckinridge Long's office said, yes, but 20,000 beautiful Jewish children grow up to be 20,000 ugly Jewish adults. And this was the type of spirit that people were combating at this time to get a visa. But the Rebbe was lucky. He still had a lot of prominent individuals pushing his case, and eventually he did get his visa. And in March of 1940, he took one of the last planes from Riga to Stockholm, Sweden. And what makes this so remarkable is that a few weeks later, the Soviet Union would take over most of the Baltic states, take over all the Baltic states, and many of the rabbis who remained back there were sent off to gulags in Siberia and killed as anti-revolutionaries. So had the Rebbe remained in Riga for a few more weeks, he most likely would have been killed. Now, once the Rebbe was in Stockholm, he took a train and then to the town of Gothenburg on the western coast. Once there, he boarded the ocean liner, the Drottningholm, and took that ship through the Baltic Sea, along the western coast of Norway, and then out to the Atlantic. What makes this so remarkable is that a few weeks later, the Nazi regime would invade Denmark and Norway, taking over those nations and cutting off most of the shipping lanes going in and out of the Baltic Sea. In preparation for this attack, Germany had sent 90% of its U-boat force off the coast of Norway. 2 ships that left before the Rebbe ship left were hit by torpedoes, sunk, everybody died on board. 2 ships leaving after the Rebbe ship left were hit by torpedoes, sunk, everybody died. The Rebbe, when he got around to Bergen, had mechanical problems. The ship had mechanical problems, and it was a sitting duck there for a whole day. But luckily, they got the engine repaired and continued on its way. And you can just imagine how the Rebbe's feeling at this time. Finally, on my way to freedom, on my way from Nazi Germany, and then all of a sudden, up from under the ocean comes bubbling a German U-boat. Red flag unfurled, big black swastika. And you can just imagine what the people on board are thinking, because most of the people on this ship were Jewish refugees. Yet luckily, the German U-boat captain was not there to enforce Nazi racial policy. He was just there to see if there was any military hardware on the ship. And once he was able to verify that there was no military contraband on the ship, he let it continue on its way. But that was not the end of the danger. Germany had laid thousands and thousands of mines all in the North Sea and the Northern Atlantic around Scotland and all around Great Britain. A ship that was one day's journey ahead of the Rebbe ship was hit by mines. Half of the people on board died there. Now remember, the Rebbe is in his stateroom. He's down in the middle of the ship, and he's in a wheelchair. If they got hit by a torpedo, just imagine the chaos of trying to get him up to a lifeboat in his wheelchair. But luckily, they made it through this minefield, and then he made it on to America. And on the 18th of March, 1940, his ship docked in New York City Harbor. On the 19th of March, he stepped foot on the soil of the United States, and he declared America to be the new headquarters of Yiddishkeit in the world, of Judaism in the world. There's a picture of the ship. It was 600 feet long, and it provided an easy target for German U-boats had it been misidentified or had it failed to held to when a German U-boat called it to do so. The Drottningholm was under the flag of Sweden. Now, telling you all this, I've only been able to scratch the surface of all the different ways that the Rebbe was saved and the different things that had to take place. And hopefully I've sparked your curiosity to open up the book and read it. Now, I can give you 60 reasons why the Rebbe should have died. I can't give you one of why he survived. As Director Strauss rightly noted, the Lubavitchers say it was God, it was the divine intervention that saved the Rebbe. Well, as a secular historian, that forces me to ask, where was God with 6 million more people that needed to be rescued in 1939? Now, when the Rebbe got to America, he started to do an awful lot to rescue his followers and family members over in Europe. And unfortunately, most of his efforts were failures. Most of the, as I just described with the visa machinery here in America, it was very difficult to get a visa. And as Professor Henry Feingold wrote, that once you finally got the visa, most often it applied to a corpse. And so the Rebbe had a lot of frustration in this area. He had a lot of failures. But he was successful in getting one person out of Vichy, or two people actually, out of Vichy, France, that were incredibly important for the movement. And that was his daughter and his son-in-law, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who would eventually become the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe of the Chabad movement. Now, if you don't have the rescue of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Joseph Isaac Schneerson, in 1940 out of Europe, you don't have the rescue of the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, in 1941 out of Vichy, France. And if that happened, you would have a dramatically different Chabad movement today and dramatically weaker and smaller. Now, when the Rebbe was having all these difficulties, he started to really focus on his spiritual mission. And a lot of people have asked at this time, why didn't the Rebbe approach the politicians that helped him to rescue other lives if he was having so many problems? Well, this is the controversial thing about this research. He did contact these politicians that had helped rescue him, but he didn't contact them to rescue lives. He contacted them to rescue his library, his 40,000 volume book library. And in 1941, you have several tons of books that show up in 2 large semis at Brooklyn 770, the headquarters. Now, you can look at this in 2 ways. You can look at it one way. Why was the Rebbe so obsessed with books, as Director Zuroff of the Wiesenthal Center in Israel has noted, and I as well? You know, he should have been focusing on saving lives and doing everything he could to put his energies and resources into that platform. Yet, you can look at it another way. In 1941, you could get several tons of books out of Europe, but you couldn't get one human soul. Also this time, many people have asked, well, why didn't the Rebbe work with other Jewish organizations to, get a unified front and help rescue lives? Well, this is a sad chapter of American Jewish history at this time. A lot of the different organizations were fighting amongst themselves, and Rebbe Schneerson, he was very strong with his criticism of especially the Vad Hatzalah, the Jewish Orthodox of the yeshiva world, Orthodox rescue organization. And the 2 men that he took the task were Rabbi Aaron Kotler and Rabbi Avraham Kamenovitz. And he thought that these men were unnecessarily compromising their religious integrity by meeting with secular leaders, Christian leaders, meeting on the Sabbath, organizing protest marches, petitioning the government. And he was calling this, in one instance, Jewish Nazism. He thought it was really degrading the spiritual essence of Judaism, and it was causing the Holocaust. Yet we see with what Rabbi Kotler and Rabbi Kamenovitz were doing. They were meeting with politicians, they were petitioning politicians, they had a huge protest march in 1943, and they were working with Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau, and they eventually brought about the War Refugee Board in 1944, which saved between 100 to 200,000 lives. And so we see that the Rebbe, made some mistakes. He missed opportunities. And this reminds me of the following story. There's a man by the name of John, and he lived on a hillside in North Carolina with his family. And all of a sudden, a huge thunderstorm came, and the whole region started to flood. So some of his neighbors came up to him and said, "John, come with your wife and your 2 kids. Get in the car. It's dangerous to stay here." And John said, "No, I believe in God. I have faith in God. God will save me and my wife and 2 children." And all of a sudden, the waters rise up, and John has to get his family up on the roof. And some other neighbors come by in a boat and say, "John, get in the boat. It's dangerous to stay here. It's flooding." And John says, "No, my family, we believe in God. We have faith in God. He will save us." And the waters rise up, and John has to get on the chimney with his family. And a helicopter comes by and says, "Here, grab this rope ladder. It's dangerous to stay here." And John yells out, "No, I believe in God. God will rescue us, save us." And all of a sudden, the waters rise up. They sweep John and his family away, and the waters kill him. And when he gets up to heaven, he says, "God, I believed in you. We believed in you. Look at my wife and my children. Why didn't you save us?" And God said, "What are you talking about? I sent you a truck, I sent you a bus, and I sent you a helicopter." And I think this is the sad story about my book, that it really illustrates that so many opportunities were missed, and a lot of different communities were fighting amongst themselves. You had the anti-Zionists fighting the Zionists, the Reform fighting the Orthodox. You had the Lubavitchers fighting the yeshiva world, instead of uniting together and help rescue lives. And this is one thing I try to really get across in my book, is that why can't we see the beautiful bridges that bond us instead of the tiny little streams that divide us? Now, when the Rebbe had all these failures, he started to turn into his inward and really look at his spiritual mission. And he believed that, and the reason why the Jews were having so many problems under Hitler, the reason why the Holocaust was happening, is because God was displeased and he was punishing the Jews for their sins. He believed that Jews were being punished for not keeping the Sabbath holy, not practicing the family purity laws, not praying, not studying Torah, and not doing their best to keep the 613 commandments. Here are some phrases that he gave. He believed that what was happening in Europe was an edict from heaven issued to force all Jews to teshuvah, or to repentance, who had left Judaism as the Rebbe defined Judaism. He believed that the focus was wrong in the secular world. It should be focused on God, because only God could truly change the situation. He said, "We mortals, we Jews, will not be helped by politicians or governments. The wise and understanding person will not be influenced by such foolishness. We Jews will be helped by Torah, the commandments, and repentance." Now here's an irony of history. The Rebbe is saying that secular and Reform Jews were the cause of the Holocaust. Yet when you look at Justice Louis Brandeis and Assistant Attorney Benjamin Cohen, R. Ernst Bloch, and 2 other men that were in his unit that were of Jewish descent, he was rescued by those very people. Yet this irony did not seem to dawn on him. A lot of rabbis in the Lubavitcher movement say that what the Rebbe was saying is grounded in the Torah. It's grounded in biblical text. As it says here in Leviticus, God says, "If you do not maintain my covenant, I will give you over to your enemies." Yet one can make an argument that it's how you interpret the Torah. Let's not forget that Moses was punished by God for slandering Israel and hitting the rock. And that's what it seems what the Rebbe was doing at this time. He was slandering Israel. And also, who do you believe who comes on the scene and begins speaking on behalf of God? Do you believe Reverend Jerry Falwell, who after 9/11 comes on the scene and says, God is punishing us with terrorism because of pagans, i.e. Jews, Mormons, Hindus? Then he goes on and says feminists, abortionists, and homosexuals. And he uses the New Testament as his supporting document. Do you believe Osama bin Laden, who comes forward and says that the West is being punished because Allah is displeased with us? And he uses the Quran. Or when you're looking at the Holocaust, do you believe what the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Teitelbaum, said, that the Holocaust was happening because of the Zionists? God was angry at the Zionists. And here's another irony. Rebbe Teitelbaum was rescued by the Zionists in 1944 from Nazi-occupied Europe. Describing this to Chancellor Norman Lamb of Yeshiva University, he said what the Rebbe was doing was blasphemy. And he cites numbers saying, let's not forget, Moses was punished for also doing this. And he also cites the Midrash, saying God does not approve of one who slanders Israel. And why there's so much, the reason why there's so much, I think, controversy about this, especially in the Lubavitcher community, is because they've been stamped by Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he had a dramatically different way of looking at the Holocaust. And the way that he looks at the Holocaust seems to vindicate what Dr. Rabbi Norman Lamb said. Menachem Mendel Schneerson said, to say that God was punishing the Jews with the Holocaust is a desecration of God's name. And I think this is a very humane and tolerant way of looking at the Holocaust. And this is the philosophy that has really inundated Lubavitch today. Most of them do not know about the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe's take on the Holocaust. They do know about Menachem Mendel Schneerson's take on it, and this is why it's caused a lot of confusion. The idea that God is omnipotent and intimately involved in human affairs is full of a lot of problems and is difficult to believe for a secular historian. As Karen Armstrong wrote, she said, "If God is omnipotent, he could have prevented the Holocaust. If he could not have prevented it, then he's impotent and useless. And if he could have prevented it and chose not to, then he's a monster." Well, we can even take this a step further and ask, if God actually ordered it, what does this tell us about God? And I think this shows you that nobody really has a corner on the market of why God is doing what he is doing. You know, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe Rebbe Teitelbaum, Rebbe Schneerson, Reverend Jerry Falwell? I like what a famous Hasidic rabbi here in New York City, his name is Chassel Besser. He's a wonderful man, a very tolerant man, very brilliant. I actually have the first Hasidic rabbi I ever could talk to about German military strategy of World War II, and he knew more generals than I did at that time, and still does. He said, you know, I'm not in heaven, and I'm not a prophet, and I don't know why God did the Holocaust. But I do know one thing, is that it teaches me that I need to be a better person each day of my life. I also like what Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote. And I have his quote up here, and I'm paraphrasing when he says, you know, the concept that God gives us what we deserve, that our misdeeds cause our misfortunes, is a nice and attractive solution to the problem of evil, but it has several problems on many levels. It forces people to blame themselves. It creates guilt where there is no guilt. It makes people hate God, and even worse, it makes them hate themselves. And more importantly, it doesn't even fit the facts. I mean, one can ask with the Holocaust, if God was punishing the Jews for their sins with the Holocaust, then what about the gypsies, the homosexuals, and the Slavs that were killed also in the Holocaust? Yet this view of the Holocaust that the Rebbe had forced him, like nothing else, to build up his community in America. And this is, on one side, you know, it was an incredible feat that he was able to do. But on the other side, this has also created a lot of controversy, because a lot of people have questioned, why was he focusing on building yeshivas and schools in America when he should have been focusing on using those resources to save lives? But nonetheless, he was extremely successful. And as many of you know, the largest Hasidic community in the world today is the Lubavitcher community. And they do an awful lot of good, helping people in prison, helping people who are in need of food and shelter. They're doing a lot with the tsunami relief effort. And so they do an incredible outreach program. And so this has been the legacy of Lubavitch in many respects, and they have done amazing good. And without that rescue, you would not have had this community building itself up the way that it has. Several people have asked me, what happened to Bloch and Canaris? Bloch, after he rescued the Lubavitcher Rebbe, went back to his duties in the Secret Service. And there's even some evidence that I found that 4 months later he rescued the Ger Rebbe, which is the largest Hasidic community in Israel, and got him to Italy, where he was able to get on to Palestine, which is also an interesting story. So it seemed like he did some more rescue efforts, but then by 1943, a lot of his activities in the Secret Service had dried up. And he was sent to the Eastern Front as a regimental combat commander. He served 1 year there, and then after the July 1944 bomb attack on Hitler, Hitler started to revoke most of the Aryanizations that he had given to date, and Bloch was discharged. And before he was sent to a forced labor camp, he was redrafted into a paramilitary organization, and he helped train soldiers to fight the Russians. And after he trained them, he was sent up to Berlin to fight the Soviets, and 1 week before the war ended, he died in battle. Canaris, during the 1930s, was doing an awful lot to get Hitler removed from power. He believed, especially by the early 1940s, that Hitler was a disaster. In 1943, these activities this information got to the SS, and Canaris was arrested. In 1944, Canaris was sent to a concentration camp, Flossenburg, where he was beaten up horribly, interrogated, and his nose was cut off. And 1 month before the war ended, he was hanged and then put on a pile of wood and incinerated. I talked to a man recently that actually watched this happen, and he says through his cell window, he could see the flakes of skin floating up in the flames as he was burning. So that's what happened to these two men. And here's another interesting take on the way that Lubavitch deals with the history. Many of them believe that it was God's intervention, that these men were angels in human form. And as a result, there's been no effort by Lubavitch to contact these individuals and thank them and so on, because the spiritual world takes precedent over everything else. And many of them believe that they're living in the end times, the time of the Messiah, so this emphasis sometimes is understandable. But it's also sad that there's really been no focus on these men who actually, if you look at the Americans and the Germans, it was the Germans that had a little motivation of humanity. The Americans, the only reason why they acted was because they were politically pushed. They only acted to rescue the Rebbe because it was politically advantageous to them. The Germans here, Canaris didn't have to act on this. He could have gotten that request and said, okay, I'm sending 20 of my agents up there. 2 weeks later, reported after having done nothing, but he could have said, hey, I sent them all up, half of them are dead, I'm sorry, there's nothing more I can do for you, and leave it at that. He put his life and the life of his men on the line to help rescue Rebbe Schneerson. In Jewish philosophy, it says if you save a life, you save the world. Well, the rescue of the Rebbe saved almost 24 lives, and all it took was a little letter writing, a few $1,000s, and the courage to speak up. In a sense, it is sad that in 1939, the 6 million Jews who would die in the Holocaust were not all Rebbes. Hopefully, the story of the rescue of the Reich, rescue of the Rebbe, and also just the study of the Holocaust in general will help motivate all of us to recognize the signs of genocide on the horizon and stamp it out where we see it. Unfortunately, with the example of Rwanda in the 1990s, where 1.5 million Africans were slaughtered, and the current genocide going on in Sudan shows us that we're not doing enough. All those of us who hold up that banner, never again, we have so much more to do. And also looking at the moral issues and questions of history, one just has to ask that if those 1.5 million Africans who were slaughtered in Rwanda were 1.5 million Americans, or 1.5 million Jews, how different the response would have been coming out of America. Yet were those souls any different? Ultimately, I believe that the story of the rescue of the Rebbe should force each one of us to analyze our lives and see what we are doing to help our fellow man, especially when that fellow man is in danger of dying. What are you doing to help mankind? The rescuers of Rebbe Schneerson felt that by saving him, they were saving the greatest Jewish sage of their day and even the potential Messiah. By saving him, they were committing the ultimate act of goodness. So with this in mind, what are you giving of your time, energy, and resources to make this world a better place? And if you're making contributions, how can you make those contributions more effective and powerful? The followers of the Rebbe, they show us that uncommon people from diverse backgrounds were able to unite together and push through a positive action to save lives. If ultra-Hasidic Lubavitcher Jews can work with an anti-Semitic, anti-refugee U.S. government that in turn worked with the Nazi Secret Service to rescue one of the most prominent Orthodox rabbis of 1939, then the question that should be asked of us is, what can we not do if we decide to put away our petty prejudices and our religious differences to unite together and make this world a better place? The story, ladies and gentlemen, shows us that each one of us has an incredible opportunity every day of our lives to make a difference, especially a difference in people's lives who are in danger of dying. All it takes is the courage to speak up and the willingness to put our time, energy, and resources into a cause that is bigger and better than ourselves. Recently, during a Shabbat service, I heard the following phrase that was given out that really, I think, touches on this. It says, "Pray as if everything depended on God. Act as if everything depended on you." Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, ma'am.
Dasha.
Yeah, Dasha. Yeah, Rabbi Besser's friend. Good to see you, Dasha.
I am so touched by it. Because
I'll repeat the question.
We have a microphone.
Oh, okay.
Because I lost my parents and my entire family. Yes. And I cannot help it. I'm trying to be sober that why did not my father, who was such a righteous tzaddik, deserve to be fought for his life? My brothers, my sisters. And every time I come upon a story like that, I feel like pulling my hair. I feel my fate is crushed. I feel these men took upon themselves to be God. They had the power as if they were God. Who should live and who should die? And you just suffocate with so many questions for which there are no answers. You only remain more angry, more frustrated, more questionable about God. And I could say, I'm in God's image.
Yeah.
What does it say about God?
Yeah, the question, what does this whole research, say about God? I think this is, we're maybe blessed with 70. Whoops. Oh, okay. We're maybe blessed with 70 or 80 years of life. And I think the greatest danger from what I've been able to see with my short lifespan is when somebody comes forward and says, with my life of 50 or 60 years, this body of knowledge that I have, it's the correct way. And if you don't believe the way that I do, if you're not in this circle, then you're wrong. And this leads to incredible atrocities and I think also misconceptions of history. And I'd like to give a little, on that point, one thing that we see with Christianity during World War II, especially in Nazi Germany, we see a huge failure here. And I think partly the reason for that is the following. 90% of the German population were church-going members. And many of them were taught that this is the way that you need to believe. You need to believe in Jesus, the Messiah. He came for your sins. You believe in him, you go to heaven. If you don't, you're going to go to hell. And this way of thinking about people as saved and not saved, I think is very dangerous because a lot of Christians, when they view people as saved and unsaved, they view as those people who are lost as inferior. Why can't they just believe in Jesus? If they believe in Jesus, everything would be okay. They wouldn't have the Holocaust. They wouldn't have all the problems in life. Never mind the fact that the church has been usually the cause of the problems the last 2,000 years. They say, those Buddhists, they're going to hell. Those Hindus, they're going to hell. Why can't they believe? And they spiritually exterminate these people. And as we see in Nazi Germany, the line between thinking about people in those categories and then stepping over it and giving them a helpful push is very small. We see that the churches in Nazi Germany were many of them were very, willing to use God's name to vindicate a lot of things that were going on. And I think this is something that I try to bring out in the book in all different areas, is that when anybody comes forward and says, my theology, my religion is the best way, and I know why God is doing what he is doing, and here are my religious texts, danger. Especially when you start pointing the finger and condemning others. Yes. All right, thank you.
I didn't understand, you didn't explain why was the Rebbe against the Varatzola, and also, do they have children, this block, they have family, did you speak to the family?
Yeah, good question. The question is, why was the Rebbe against the Vad Hatzalah? Well, the Vad Hatzalah was the Yeshiva World Rescue organization. They call them a lot of times the Misnagdim. And I think the reason why there was a lot of bad blood between these two organizations is it goes back to the Vilna Gaon, who was against the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement and the Misnagdim world were always against one another. And the Rebbe really believed that only God could change the situation. And he felt that Rabbi Kotler and Rabbi Kamenovitz, by their actions, were showing that they didn't believe in God. They were trying to they didn't believe in God to take care of the whole situation. That they were believing that, hey, secular means and political means were the way to do it, and they were violating their religious integrity, their spiritual integrity by meeting on the Sabbath, meeting with secular leaders, and doing these type of things. I think this is one thing that he saw that was really horrible. The next question is about Bloch's children. Have I interviewed them? Yes, and they're wonderful individuals. One is a Buddhist priest out in California. Another is a doctor in Hamburg, a wonderful woman. Another was a retired civil servant from Germany. And then another one is an engineer in Paris. And these people, it was really beautiful for me, especially for the two daughters, the doctor up in Hamburg. I came to her house to interview her, and she was born, I think, 3 months before her father died. So she never got to know her father. And I came there with probably about 300 pages of documents. And I sat her down, and I gave these documents, and she just started crying. And she said, "You've given me my father." She never knew anything about him. And many of the family, according to the Buddhist priests, they said, we've always thought of him as that Nazi soldier that left us alone. They never understood this Prussian, desire to be loyal to your country and do your duty. But now that he's not the Nazi, but yet he was doing rescue mission, that he wasn't, this one side, this one character that they were thinking that he was, and this thing that they were scared that he was. Suddenly, they realized, hey, he did some good. It's not all black and white. And that's been a really great, blessing in my life. So I've been in touch with the whole family, and they're wonderful.
I would like you to elaborate on one point. Namely, is it true that the Rebbe had a choice either to rescue his 40,000 volumes or a number of Jewish people?
The question is, was it an option given to him, either I rescue the books or rescue people? What I'm talking about, I don't think that was as black and white as you're presenting it. I think what it is he was taking resources away from rescue activities. And he was focusing on rescuing the books at that time when, according to Director Zuroff as well as myself, he could have taken those resources and focused on rescue mission, meeting politicians, using all those resources. And that's where the problem comes to the forefront. So in a sense, yes, he did have options out there. And in retrospect, we see that a lot of the decisions that he made were mistakes. He missed out on opportunities. Yes, Milton. Yes, please. Sure. And this gentleman, Milton Kramer, he is the son of Chaim Kramer, who's the brother of Samuel Kramer. And these two men here, in my book, these are Zadakim. These are righteous individuals. The Kramer family is incredible. With hardly any experience with, doing these rescue efforts, they were able to get to the very top of the U.S. government and get it to move to rescue 20 lives. And if we had 5,000, 2,000, 100 Kramers back then, we would have thousands of more people today. So this family is incredible, and this is a son.
Well, to shed a little light and to clarify the point that this gentleman raised in your response, could you go into a little bit more detail about the difference as far as the legal difference between rescuing books and rescuing people?
Yes.
They are not the same.
Yeah, Milton Kramer is very...
So please make a strong point about that.
Sure. Very, very good point, Milton Kramer. I mean, if the Rebbe had been presented with those options, books or people, it's halakha that you save lives, period. Yeah, I mean, that's clear. But what the Rebbe was doing at this time, it was the focus and, I guess, perspective that was going on at that time that, he should have been, many people feel that he should have been much more aggressive and much more urgent, a sense of urgency in his actions, which really wasn't there. And, all the efforts that were done to save him were not utilized to save others. He did have people that eventually got to Eleanor Roosevelt. But when they met with Eleanor Roosevelt, it wasn't to rescue people under Nazi Germany. It was to rescue people under Stalin, because that's where a lot of his followers were. So this is where the confusion comes in. But had the Rebbe been presented with books or people, halakha would have dictated, and his personality would dictate he would have rescued lives. Yeah, that's a very good point. Oh. Okay. Okay. Please, ma'am.
A comment and a question. First of all, I appreciate your message at the end of the presentation about where we take this in terms of what's going on in the world and making a difference. My question is, how has your book been received by Lubavitch, by Lubavitchers?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you for that comment. One thing I want to throw out there with the way that I ended, one organization, if many of you are asking, hey, what can I do? Doctors Without Borders is an incredible organization, and a lesser-known one is Architects Without Borders. You can Google it and find these websites. They go out and they help people who don't have any resources to get medical care or get homes. Now to your point about the book. How has Lubavitch received it? You know, I was having a dinner with several Lubavitcher rabbis. And, you know, me being the person I am and how I was trained, I was sitting around the table and I said, you know, I think the Rebbe only made 3 mistakes. Dead silence. And then I realized, well, I guess I shouldn't talk about the French prostitute, you know. No, that's a joke, you know. And, you know, and when I said that to them, there was also just a deeper silence. So, you know, it's very hard to deal with these people when they don't realize this guy, he had, you know, body odor, he made mistakes, he fell down, you know, he bled, he had feelings, he had emotions, he had lust. You know, he was a human being. And so when I started coming out and saying, hey, you know, he missed the boat a few places here, or he's, you know, why is he condemning these people instead of just, you know, working on himself? They have a very hard time with this. I'll give you a few examples of some of the experiences I had. One Lubavitcher Hasid, wonderful man. Of course, I'm not going to be able to name some of these individuals. But he's a wonderful guy, and he calls me up, and he's like, this is incredible, you know, I never knew all this. And he starts going on. I was like, well, thank you very much. Sir, you know, since you are a revered person in the community, can I use you as a blurb? That would be wonderful. He's like, you got to realize, as a Hasid, you know, I can't do that. You know, I can't come out and endorse somebody that says something like this about the Rebbe. And also, they have had a lot of problems dealing with a lot of their history. You know, here again, Chabad is a wonderful organization. They do an awful lot of good, but they have a lot of hard times coming to terms with their past. Like, for example, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, he studied in Berlin, never got a degree in the Sorbonne or Berlin, no matter how much they tell you that he was an engineer working for the Secret Service with the Navy and so on. But when he got photographed for the Berlin University, he wasn't wearing a yarmulke. When that picture came to Lubavitch, they painted a yarmulke on the picture. I had some Lubavitcher rabbis from, you know, Chabad.org get in touch with me, and they said, you know, because I was giving it out to everybody I could to get feedback. You know, hey, I'm one person, I'm a human being, I make mistakes. You know, help me out here. And Milton Kramer was incredible. I owe him probably about 20 red pencils. He went through about 5 drafts of my work. He was a wonderful individual, also a tzaddik in the Kramer fashion. And so, you know, this rabbi got in touch with me, or I guess he's a yeshiva student, but he had a lot of documents. He read my manuscript and he said, hey, I got a lot of documents and I think you need to change a lot of things in chapter 14, which is talking about the Rebbe's view of the Holocaust. And he's like, besides, where did you get all those sayings from the Rebbe? What sources are you using? And I said, well, I'm using your sources, Quixote Publishing, the Chabad Publishing House. He's like, oh. But then he said, hey, I got all these documents, it's going to change what you think. And I was like, okay, great. That's my job as a historian. He's like, I'll tell you what. I'll give you 2 or 3 documents at a time. You incorporate it into your book. I'll see how you incorporate it, and then I'll reserve the right to give you more documents. I said, hey, I can't do that. That's unethical. And also, I mean, you can give me, you know, 5 or 6 documents that shows that Bush is an incredible public speaker. But if you give me the whole document trail of a campaign, we're going to have a different story, you know? So I got to look at everything, you know, to give me the context of the history. I had another rabbi from Lubavitch get in touch with me, and, you know, from Chabad.org and say, hey, you know, if you take that out, I can guarantee you thousands of dollars and you'll be on the Chabad lecture circuit, you know? I was like, but people want to know what they did with it, you know, what he did with his rescue. So Lubavitch, how they responded, I think many of them are fascinated by the story. They might read it in private, but as far as coming out and saying, you know, this is, you know, incredible, we endorse it, they have a hard time. It's like asking a born-again Christian to look at Jesus in human terms, that he had lust in his heart, that he struggled with things, you know, that he maybe kissed Mary Magdalene, according to the Da Vinci Code, who knows? You know, so it's very hard to take them from that spiritual world and look at this in a very black and white situation. You know, there's always 3 sides to every story, his side, her side, and the truth. And this lady has been very patient. Well, thank you, Frank. It's not often you have the director from the Jewish Center here run around for you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, sir.
The figure that you gave on the number of Jews serving in Hitler's army seems staggering. If I remember correctly, you said something like 50,000?
The figure is 60,000 half-Jews and 90,000 quarter-Jews who served in the German armed forces, so 150,000 so-called Mischling soldiers, according to the Nazis.
My question is, my comment is, and I would like you to comment on that, it seems inconceivable that these people, knowing where they came from and knowing what Hitler was about, would willingly want to fight in Hitler's army.
Yeah, very good question. And that's a question that plagued me for, 12 years as I did this research and wrote the book. And I would, if you're really interested in knowing the full details of that, I encourage you to look at my first book, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. Now, the quick answer to that, the 150,000 so-called Mischling soldiers is a very small percentage of the Wehrmacht. By 1945, over 18 million men went to the ranks of the German armed forces. So the so-called partial Jewish soldiers, 150,000 of them, represent less than 1% of the total manpower of the German armed forces. And when you look at assimilation, birth rates, and mixed marriage rates, and after talking to a few statisticians, that's how I came to that number. Now, this is what's crazy. Half Jews and quarter Jews had to serve. They were conscripted. They didn't have a choice. When a half Jew was conscripted, he couldn't go to the draft board and say, I feel Jewish, you're persecuting my family, I don't want to serve. There was no such thing as a conscientious objector back then. And, Hitler did not know the Pandora box that he was going to open up when he was declaring that these men had to serve. First of all, I don't think he knew the numbers that he was dealing with. And second of all, I don't think he really thought far enough ahead to really look at the problems that he would create for his regime. Because think about it, these guys are serving and all of a sudden mom is being beaten up in the street, grandma's being arrested and thrown in an SS prison, dad is losing his work, and many of these guys are going to their superiors and saying, hey, look, I serve this country honorably, I have the Iron Cross, and look how my family's being treated. And many of these requests eventually reached Hitler, and by 1940 he started to discharge the half-Jews from the military. But this discharge order was very hard to push through because a lot of half-Jews didn't even know themselves that they were half-Jews. Many of them were successful at hiding their ancestry, and this discharge order wasn't being widely enforced. Also, Hitler had decreed in this discharge order that any half-Jew who had performed well in battle was allowed to apply for clemency. And so you had thousands of guys submitting applications, like Bloch did, and Hitler was actually giving thousands of clemency documents to these people. So when you look at assimilation in Germany, and you start realizing how the German military was organized, it's not that shocking anymore that 150,000 people of Jewish descent served in the military. The tragedies are how these men dealt with that, what their experiences were, and on average, every man who I documented lost between 7 and 8 relatives in the Shoah, the Holocaust. So this is a new chapter, I would say, in many respects of the Holocaust that hasn't been looked at very closely, and I was blessed to fall into it and do 10 years or 12 years of research that culminated in these 2 books. There you go.
You talk about your research. Maybe you can talk about maybe some mysteries or things you revealed that's going to be your next book.
Thank you, Gail, for the question. I have a book that's coming out with Yale University here in a year, and it's called Voices of Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. And I've taken 27 of the most interesting case studies, and I've written up their biographies, because a lot of people have asked me the last 2 years on the lecture circuit, how did this guy feel? What did he do? And there's some of these men that they served in the military, and then later on, they served in the Israeli army. And a lot of difficult issues that are surrounding these guys that bring up a lot of troubling questions about identity and history. Like, for example, one man that I have to note, just to tell you a little bit of the flavor of what I'm talking about, his name was Heinrich Meyer. And he had served 2 years in the Wehrmacht. He was discharged, and then he was lucky to remain in Berlin for a few years before he was sent to a forced labor camp. He survived that camp, and after the war, he went down to Israel, and he served in the Israeli military for several years. And in 1953, his company commander calls him to the duty hut and says, you need to go down to the courthouse and get your ID papers in order. Meyer goes down there, and the bureaucrat pulls out the file on him and says, okay, Meyer, you served a few years in the Wehrmacht. How'd that happen? Meyer explained, okay, you were persecuted for being a Jew under Nazi Germany. You lost your father in Auschwitz. You were sent to a forced labor camp. What about your mother? Well, my mom, she's a Gentile. She's a Christian. Oh, said the bureaucrat, you're not Jewish. Wait a second, said Meyer. I was persecuted for 12 years under Hitler for being a Jew. I lost my father in Auschwitz. I was sent to a forced labor camp. I've now served 5 years in the Israeli military. I've been wounded 7 times. I'm an officer. And you're telling me I'm not Jewish? Hey, he says, I'm just telling you what's on the book. On the books. You can either prove that your mother is Jewish by halakha and the law of return, or you can convert to Judaism. Well, I'm an atheist, Meyer said. Well, we have a problem, said the bureaucrat. Meyer got so fed up with this that he returned to Germany. He said, maybe in a democratic country, I can decide who I want to be. So these type of stories, really putting the human face on it, is what I'm going to be diving into with this next book. And then I'm actually working on a book about my learning difficulties. Because if I can, go to Yale and Cambridge with the way that I started out, anybody can with the right attitude and motivation. My mom, a lot of people ask her, you must be so proud. And she says, well, of course I am. I'm the mom. But more than that, I'm just relieved. She says, I was expecting to see pictures of him later. Yeah. One more? Okay, one more question. And the way back? Okay. Okay. Can I answer that as well?
Hi. To be honest, I'm a Lubavitcher, so...
Hey, nobody's perfect.
Thank you. It's a fascinating story that you're telling about how the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was saved from Europe. I have to admit, I am slightly disturbed by the conjecture and divergence about if or if not, did the Frierdiker Rebbe save Jews? Did he work to save Jews? Was he able to save Jews? Especially since I know my wife's grandfather received a visa due to the efforts of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Sure, I understand.
Him and 8 friends went to Montreal.
Yeah, through Shanghai.
Yeah, they were in the Warsaw Ghetto. How can you say with certainty what a person didn't do? I mean, as a historian, you look up the trail of what people did do. How can you tell what people didn't do here, especially since I'm aware of a lot of people who were saved?
Okay, very good question.
Thank you.
When you look at what supposedly the Rebbe was doing, you would find corresponding documents in the National Archives or the Presidential Library in Hyde Park with Roosevelt. All you find there, you find a lot of documents from Rabbi Kotler and Rabbi Kamenovitz petitioning the government. They're asking the government to bomb the links to Auschwitz. They're doing everything they can. And they're trying to get other people on board. They're working with reform rabbis. They're working with secular, the Berkson boys. And they're doing an awful lot of good. The Rebbe's condemning them at this time instead of working with them. That's one proof right there. He missed an opportunity of putting away religious differences. The yeshiva world could have done the same thing. There was bad blood on both sides. But instead of condemning them, he should have gone to them and said, hey, what can I do with my 160,000 followers in Canada and America to help rescue lives? Those documents aren't there. Also, what you could do more as far as rescuing, Kotler and Kamenovitz are also wonderful examples of what Yiddish-speaking, Eastern European, ultra-Orthodox Jews were able to do. They were meeting all over the place, petitioning people. And here again, this is what I want to get across. Why can't we just see the common humanity we all share and work together to help save lives instead of pointing fingers? And that was what the Rebbe was doing a lot at that time. And if there was a lot of rescue efforts that were done with the government, the documents aren't there. Now, if you have the documents, I will be more than happy to stand corrected. But I haven't seen them after 10 years of research. Now, one question that I was allowed to answer, this gentleman in the front said, how did my family respond when I came and found out about my Jewish background? And, how do they view themselves today? Well, when I came forward to a lot of my family members, they said, I wouldn't talk about this that much. We have enough problems as a family as it is. We don't need anti-Semitism as well. And I said, well, you love Jesus and he was a Jew. That's different, they said. I was like, no, it's not. He was a rabbi. Eventually, many of them have come around. One of my cousins came forward and said, hey, what Brian's found out, I always suspected. I had some of these historical leads, and he's a lot older cousin. He's in his 60s now. Wonderful mind. And so a lot of people came forward and started looking at it. My mom actually now embraces it. She goes to a Messianic synagogue every now and then. This is the Jews for Jesus organization. When the Orthodox rabbi who had helped me learn about my, yichus, my Yiddishkeit, my Jewish background, when he heard about this, he's like, oh, that's worse. He's like, that's 20 steps backwards. So, they've embraced it. And, the way that it's kind of focused, me, is, I was brought up in a very Christian environment. When I was 8 years old, I was told in the Bible church I was at, you got to ask Jesus into your heart. And when you ask Jesus into your heart, that's when you will be able to go to heaven, live for eternity with God and all your family members, no pain. It's wonderful. If you don't do this, you're going to go down to hell and live with Lucifer and fry for all eternity. There's going to be, pools of human flesh reaching up and grabbing you, blood, the gnashing of teeth, and when. So for an 8-year-old, this decision was a no-brainer. I asked Jesus into my heart. Whew. I got my fire insurance. So, then I hit around 12 or 13, and I go to a Church of Christ school, and they have a different doctrine, a different theology. And I had a Bible school, or a Bible class at this school. And after the class, he had talked about salvation, and I told him about what had happened to me. He's like, no, you got it all wrong. It's not that christening you had in the Presbyterian church when you were a kid, sprinkled. It's not that baptism you did after you asked Jesus into your heart in the Bible church. You have to actually be baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and only then, when you come out of the water, do you have salvation. All of a sudden, I started feeling the flames underneath my feet. I was like, oh no, I did it all wrong. And so I asked the teacher, could you take me up to the baptism in the church on the hill by the church and baptize me? He's like, sure. And I was just hoping God wouldn't hit me with a lightning bolt that it took from, going from the school to the church. It took about 250 yards, but I got up there without getting hit. I get baptized, and then when I come out, the pearly gates are open to me. I got my salvation. But then I get a little bit older, and I'm starting to get disturbed by a lot of things that I'm hearing from a lot of Christians. This condemnation of, we're saved and you're not. Those people are going to hell. And there's a lot of intolerance there, and they treat people as inferiors in many respects. And they don't live their religion, they only act at it. They're in the religion for what it does for themselves. They're not really in there. I mean, did you see Jesus wearing Rolexes, driving Mercedes? Especially in Texas, you have segregated churches. And a lot of people, I even had people tell me when I was young, negative things about Jews and blacks in the church. Is that in the spirit of Jesus, who actually probably looked more black than he did as the pictures we see, blonde and blue-eyed? And so I started seeing a lot of hypocrisy here, so I started going on my own my own spiritual journey. And then I find out about my own Jewish background when I'm 21. And then I get a scholarship to go to ultra-Orthodox yeshiva over in Jerusalem. And I'm over there with the yeshiva bokas, and I'm learning about my Yiddishkeit, my Jewishness. I'm embracing it. I'm very excited about learning about these things. But I'm also hearing some disturbing things. I'm hearing, those Kofrim Jews, those Reform Jews, secular Jews, those people are the reasons why we have problems here on earth. They're the reason why we had the Holocaust. They're the reason why we don't have the Messiah. And at that stage, when you ask me where I am right now with my Jewish journey, I believe, maybe God gave us religion, but Satan organized it. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I know that I don't know. I'm 33, and the older I get, the dumber I realize I am. And, I'm very intolerant of intolerance, and I'm doing the best with what I have. So that's where I'm at. Thank you very much.
Bryan-Mark-Rigg teaches history at American Military University and Southern Methodist University. He's the author of Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. His latest, Rescued from the Reich, is published by Yale University Press. On the web at yalebooks.com.